I've seen this happen many times where people just rush into this kind of zealous, enthusiastic, just over promising, and again, people are just like not in that place. They're still like, I don't even know if you're going to stay sober, so whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then that person is like dismayed and hurt by the, like, I've made this great, like, people don't want grand gestures. They want humility. You were twisted through seven. You're listening to the Sober Full podcast. I'm Veronica.
And I'm Chip.
Oh my goodness. Okay, well, welcome. We are going to be talking about today how to make amends to people you have hurt, or how to clean up the past, how to keep your side of the street clean since coming into sobriety. And kind of, alcohol allows us to not dwell on things, doesn't it?
Yeah,
it allows us to not kind of ruminate on when we feel bad about things we've said and done.
Yeah, it might slightly increase our alcohol use if we think about it too hard and we think, oh my God, I've really upset so many people. I know that in terms of sort of sobriety, this process does have its sort of nascence in some ways in the 12-step program. But I think irrespective of whether you're involved in the 12-step program or that even if you're not even in the idea of sobriety, this process is an incredibly important part of being able to live in a state of kind of moderate well-being, of not being anxious, of not being. It's a process that, yeah, irrespective of whether you're in recovery, whether you're in sobriety, whatever it is, this is a process that really needs to be embraced by anybody who wants to have good relationships with people that they might have hurt in some way in the past or they might have upset. And I think it's almost fundamental to kind of being able to live your life without having to constantly look over your shoulder, metaphorically, about, and be caught out by things, being sort of suddenly waking up in the middle of the night and remembering something that you've done and being plagued by it. I just think it's a very important process.
Yeah, and we're kind of using 12-step language, but it's an ancient religious and spiritual practice. I lived in New York, and they used to have the school holiday for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which is their version of repentance and looking. I'm not Jewish, so I apologize if I've got that a bit off, but that's generally as I understand it. And the Catholics have confession, and I think all spiritual traditions have some form of basically having a good look at yourself and going, you know what, maybe you messed up there. But I think everyone comes into sobriety with some burdens and guilt, and so we carry this guilt and the shame about how we've behaved. And this is the best way to let go of it and deal with it. Otherwise, it's like a cancer. It will eat away at you.
Yes, I mean, I think every now and then you'll get somebody who sits in front of you and says, well, I don't think I've really harmed anybody. And actually, that's one of the ways in which we perpetuate our drinking, is because we think, well, this is just my problem. It might be harming me, but it's not harming anybody else. And that's usually one of the breakthrough moments in recovery, when you recognize that actually you're affecting other people. And sometimes those people might come to you and say, you're really upsetting me. Your behavior is really detrimental to me. But I think there are a few sort of lessons or rules about this process that would be good to talk about. And I think, first of all, is to accept that it's very, very unlikely, if you have been a heavy drinker, that you haven't caused distress, harm, probably, maybe, I know definitely harm, but certainly distress, disquiet, concern. You've really upset somebody's kind of life. It would be amazing if you had come through your drinking without doing that. And even if you had, which I find extremely likely, but even if you had, you have certainly harmed yourself, and you can sort of work the process on yourself. And I think that's one of the things that often gets forgotten, is that, we make these big lists of people that we might have harmed, but we actually usually forget that we've done an awful lot of damage to ourselves as well. But I think it's the first rule I would say is just be a little bit patient. To be 3 days sober and go, oh, look, I'm really sorry for everything I've done. I'm not going to do that again. it's not going to be heard because, for a start, you've probably said that 100 times before. And so the people who you're saying that to, they're not going to hear it because it's like, oh, So I would always caution people to get a bit of sobriety under your belt, recognize, be able for people to recognize that you've made a fundamental change and you are different this time. Because if you're just behaving the same as you always have been, they're not going to hear you. And it's really important, if you're going to do this, that you are heard. I mean, it's so I think the first thing I would say is just don't rush around. And I've often seen people do this. They rush home, from rehab or something. They say they're apologetic and, really sorry, but it's too soon for the people to hear. And so that's the first thing I would say is just be a little bit patient. Give it a bit of time. Give time for your sobriety to settle. Give time for those people around you to get used to the new version of you. And just, it doesn't have to be done tomorrow. It can wait a little bit.
Yeah, and I would add to that, because I've seen this happen, is take some time and really run it by somebody else.
Yeah.
I think that I've seen this happen many times where people just rush into this kind of zealous, enthusiastic, just wanting to, over promising and again, people are just like not in that place. They're still like, I don't even know if you're going to stay sober, so whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then that person is like dismayed and hurt by I've made this great, people don't want grand gestures. They want humility. So there needs to be humility about this. And we can also still be kind of feeling like, well, they did this and da-da-da. So there's, sometimes we can do this process and just make it worse and go to apologize or, just own our part in things and then start telling them that what they've done wrong. That's not going to work. That's not going to work. It needs to be very simple. It needs to be humble. Running it by somebody who's wiser and experienced, and that could be a sponsor, mentor, religious leader, therapist, best friend.
Yeah.
Just running it by and getting a different take on it, I think is always helpful. And I also think, I've done this many times. Mm-hmm. I have gone and had to apologize or say something to someone. And it's, even with years of experience and years of sobriety, I find it very emotional and it's scary. And I'd rather gouge my eyes out than have to do it.
Yeah.
And sometimes I find it helpful to just write it down. I think the simpler, the better.
Yep.
Just very simple. Own what, I realized whatever was, I upset you and I regret that. And, I'm working on making things better. And I just wanted you to know that, it's really simple is better. I think the less you say, the better.
I think so too. I could reach into my backpack here and pull out my little list and it would be looking like a little shopping list. I always have it on me. But I think what you just said then is actually an important. You said that it's frightening. We don't want to do this. It's scary. Yeah. We don't want to have to go to and that sometimes leads people to go, well, why do I need to do this? It's in the past. Why do I need to bring it up? Let's forget about it and let's move on. And I don't want to do. And it's a really good way of avoiding something difficult. My analogy for that, to kind of illustrate why it is so important, is if I borrowed £50 off you and I didn't pay you back, every single time we meet, you are looking at me and thinking, you owe me 50 quid. Mm-hmm. I am looking at you and thinking, oh, Christ, I owe her 50 quid. Mm-hmm. And so there's this sort of force field between us that prevents us from communicating properly. Because there's one thing I don't want to do is have a conversation that has anything to do with money, because that's going to bring up the subject. So how do I, that is exactly what's going on in this field. As we've gone through our drinking things, we have borrowed money and done things, and we're not rectifying it. Because if I don't rectify that fact that I owe you 50 quid, if I don't go, here you are, here's 50 quid, the force field develops. I might go and say, look, here's 10, I'll give you another 10 next week. But I'm actually starting to address it. If I'm just avoiding it, then there is, as I said, this force field between us that means that we're never going to have a proper communication. And if, it doesn't matter whether it's a close family member or somebody you don't know very well, if there is something unresolved between you, you're not going to be able to relax in their company or anything like that. Or you're not going to be able to have a proper, authentic relationship with them. So that's why I think it is really important to do this. Now,
Can I just add
yeah,
the reason you're absolutely right, and and then say you've got 10 more things, like say you, I don't know, drove over my flower beds and ruined them, or you know had a party till 4 a.m. on a night before I had, kept me awake, or all these things, right? And there's an ickiness that lives inside of us, and that just, it weighs us down.
yeah,
It's a horrible feeling. So, one of the tactics we use is avoidance. We'll just avoid those people or those situations so we don't activate the ickiness, which then makes our world smaller. This is why we drank. All of
yeah,
this really discomforting, uncomfortable feeling, ickiness is why we drink. And we just I want to go to the grocery store, Chip, and just be, oh, hi, Chip, you're right. I don't want
yeah,
to be like,
exactly.
God,
Yeah,
this
yeah,
Chip,
yeah,
I'm going to go
yeah.
down this. Oh God, like I don't want to live my life
walk
like
around the
that.
block. I would walk around the
Yeah,
block to
yeah,
avoid the possibility of
yeah,
bumping into somebody that I had upset. I would make detours, and it would, and to carry the analogy, I would make physical detours. I would make mental detours. I would do
yeah,
anything to avoid. I would maybe not accept an invitation because I thought the person I'd upset might be there, so I don't want to do that. So I'll refuse to go there. And it, as I'm sure you've used the expression before, by keeping our side of the street clean. I want to be able to live in a certain degree of harmony. Life is going to throw brickbats at me from time to time, and it's up and down, but at least let me clear out the mess that got me to this point in life. And I think you're quite right. I think the best thing to do, get a pen and pencil and paper or whatever, some sort of way of just writing down the list. And the list is usually much shorter than people think. We often think, oh, I've harmed everybody who came into contact. I mean, I certainly thought everybody who came into contact with me was harmed. And maybe there was a certain truth in that. But there were definitely there were very obvious people who, when I started the process, I sat down and said, okay, well, who's on the list? Well, there were some people there who were obvious, my daughter, my parents, even though I didn't like my parents, and this is exactly what you were saying earlier on, even though I didn't like my parents, I knew that I'd upset them and I needed to acknowledge that. I knew that
mm,
I had caused them probably a little bit of whatever. I mean, I definitely, I'd embarrassed them for a start. My father did not like having to come to prison to visit me. He was embarrassed by that process. So
mm,
even though I don't necessarily like the person, but the first thing I think you'll do, as you quite rightly said, write down the list and just check it with somebody who's got experience about, does this feel right? Have I got my definition of kind of causing somebody harm or disorder or distress right? Because I think sometimes we can get really righteous and think, okay, well, everybody, okay, well, I owed Tommy Wilkinson from 1959 50 quid, and I've got to go and find him, and it's just like, no, Tommy Wilkinson probably isn't even alive, and he's forgotten. It's one of the problems I had. I mean, there were very obvious people on my list. It was about probably. I mean, I'm not going to fiddle around in my back pattern, but there's about 17 people on my list, but two of them are kind of generalizations because I was, as has been pointed out, I was a bit of a social liability. I was committing a lot of crime on a daily basis. I was, doing burglary and things like that. I don't know the names of those people, but I did want to somehow make a gesture, do something that kind of balanced the books a little bit. And even though I didn't know the names of those people, I acknowledged them, and I have tried to do things in my sobriety that have, I've done videos with the police, for instance. I've done podcasts, and also I don't know. I've just done things that I feel somehow kind of balance the books to those people who I don't have specific identities to. The ones that I've got specific identities to, I could tell quite easily by looking at the list. There are going to be some people on here that are going to really frighten me, and I'm not going to want to do it at all. But I really believed that it was the right thing to do. And uncomfortable it was as it was going to be, I think that maybe that's the first bit of work that people do have to do is, do you think this is the right thing to do? Do you want to put yourself
Yeah.
through this discomfort? Because, you could choose to go, as I said, well, it's in the past and, it's all forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that's a good way of going about things. I think it will come back to haunt you. The fact that I made a fraudulent travel insurance claim for 25 quid with some huge insurance company, I don't think I probably need to
Yeah.
go to that insurance company and say, look, I owe 25 quid. I certainly don't need to go to the police and say, look, you nicked me for quite a few offences, but you missed quite a few. There were one or two there that you didn't get me for. I think you probably need to get me for those as well.
There is that caveat in, and I think that let's just add this in, that the 12 steps talks about is what we also need to think about is if we go and make amends to someone, will that process actually inadvertently hurt someone?
Yeah.
So when I was drinking, I had a couple of affairs with married men.
Yep.
And one of them, I'm going to say this, and this is so far away from who I am, but one of them had recently been married and had a baby.
Yep.
And I'm appalled at my behaviour, appalled at it.
Yep.
Anyway, it was just a one-night stand. But anyway, for me to go, I took that woman's partner away for one night or whatever.
Yeah.
For me to go and find her and say, listen, you know, 6 years ago, would cause catastrophic harm.
Absolutely.
So that would be something that I just have to live with as part of what I did. So that's the other thing, is we need to think it through. Is this going to have an inadvertent repercussion on somebody innocently who is going about their life?
Yep.
It's not my business to go and relieve my conscience to burden her and harm her in that way.
Absolutely.
So
and that's usually that's usually the example I give of just taking care about when you're on this sort of righteous crusade to go and right all the wrongs of the world, that you do think about, well, and it's exactly that example I give. You don't go around to somebody's house and go, oh, I had an affair with your wife. Because
and I'm really sorry.
I'm really sorry, because that's it's just not
putting a bomb in someone's life.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think you need to think about that. So there are lots of little things to sort of think about. First of all, does this person merit being on the list? Did what I do merit being addressed? So does it dirty my side of the street? And I think the category for that is yours to decide. I mean, there are some people who think, that if you borrowed £5 20 years ago, you need to go and pay it back. I personally, I'm not necessarily in that camp, but some people take very, very strict attitudes to it. I think as I said, when I sat down with a list, it was really clear who was on it. It's almost like concentric circles. It was like people closest to me, my family, and then broadening it out from there to people that I had friends, acquaintances, people I'd let down, etc. And gradually, the circle got bigger and bigger, and so I didn't even know the identities of the people. But it's been a very up and down ride for me. I've done my list. I actually only completed my list last year. I did this list when I first got clean, and I only finished it last year. Because I found, there were certain, I went about, there were some people who were on my list who were obvious, and the reaction most of the time was really good. People said, thank you very much. Appreciate you saying that. Really glad you're doing well. Let's put it behind us and move on. There were some people who had a little bit of a sort of an uncomfortable, that kind of an uncomfortable response that made me frightened of doing it anyway. I mean, one person, as I walked into the room, said, "Don't come anywhere near me. If you're going to start talking about that, and in the end, I had to write him a letter, and actually, we resolved it, and became. I could bump into him in the street now without any problem at all. But there have been some that have gone very badly. It took me probably 30 years to find my first wife. I had treated her very badly, and I'd put adverts in the local paper and done all sorts of things like that. And eventually I got down to a list of about 5 different people with her name, and I wrote to them all saying, "I don't know whether you're the person who who married me in such and such a time." And one of them wrote back and said, "Yes, that was me." And so I said, "Well, I need to meet you." And this was probably 30, oh God, 50 years after we got married. This was 50 years later.
Wow.
And she was spitting blood. She was really, really angry, but uncomfortable. I mean, and she also reminded. I mean, I went there to sort of say sorry for treating you so badly, but she said, "Well, what about the other stuff?" And I went, "What other stuff?" And she went, "This, and this," which I had completely forgotten. Quite big things like burglaring her house and stealing a lot of her possessions. I'd completely forgotten that because I was, so drunk.
Yeah.
Or no, I wasn't. Actually, I wasn't drunk.
You were on heroin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'd forgotten about that. So she was very angry. I think it was. It took. We were to get in this pub for about an hour and a half, and it gave her an opportunity. It gave her an opportunity to say, "Yeah, you were a bit of it. You not a bit of it. You were a complete shit, and you did treat me very badly." And I mean, she wouldn't have voiced it that way, but I think she was glad of the opportunity to have been able to confront me face to face and go, "No, you treated me really badly. You were a bit of a shit, and well, actually, you were a big shit." And although she was angry, I think we were able to part with an understanding that I was genuine in what I was saying, and I felt hugely better for having addressed something that had been. I mean, I wasn't lying awake, tossing and turning about it, but it just, as I said, it dirted up my side of the street.
Yeah.
And
we don't live like that anymore.
No,
we don't
exactly.
live like that anymore. Yeah.
No, I want my side of the street to be
clean as humanly possible,
as
like our
clean
best
as humanly
efforts.
possible. Yeah, and as I said, the people on my list, there were definitely 2 people on the list who I absolutely hated with a passion. But I could not get away from the fact that my behavior had been very detrimental to them. Yes, I could put forward a very good argument that their behavior had been detrimental to me, but I, no doubt a question about it, had definitely done them harm. And although I, couldn't really stomach the idea, I had to sort of, gird my loins and go, okay, I I owe you an apology for this. And they reacted to it the way they reacted to it. Didn't, I didn't, it felt, even though it was difficult, as I said, I felt glad to have done it because I didn't think it was up to me to make a judgment about, well, I'll say it to that person, but I won't say it to that person. And it was my list. This is what I needed to do to keep my side of the street clean. And, some of those people were people I didn't bump into on a regular basis. So that kind of force field of discomfort I was talking about earlier on didn't follow me around and plague me because I wasn't meeting them. As I said, it took me 30 years to find one person. So it wasn't sort of causing me social discomfort, but it just niggled away. And I had to go to a lot of effort to find some people. And I'm so glad I did because I can go to my deathbed, hopefully not tonight, knowing that everybody I have harmed as a result of my drinking and using, I have addressed. in some form or another. Of course, that moment of sobriety doesn't necessarily mean that we stop harming people. And I think that's also something to sort of consider, is that, okay, just because I got clean on December the 1st, whatever year, that doesn't mean to say that from that point onwards, I've been a fantastic person. I have harmed people since then. I have done things that I need to apologize for. And, I haven't been perfect. It wasn't as if, well, that was BC or whatever, before cleanliness and after or whatever. I continue to upset people, and there've been a couple of times I've had to go to people, and I remember somebody lent me their villa in Greece. An incredible gesture for me and my family to go and live there for a couple of months when it was too long a story to go into, but they lent me this beautiful villa, and I invited a friend to come and stay with me. It wasn't my place to do that. And he was quite rightly very angry. And, again, so it's not as if just because I've stopped drinking, I now behave like a saint, because I haven't done. And I don't do.
I remember when I was dating my husband, and we were having a disagreement about nothing important, and he wouldn't agree. I think it was a travel date or something. He wouldn't agree to it, and I told him to F off.
Yeah.
And we don't speak to each other like that. That's the only time that's ever happened. We don't shout at each other. We don't swear at each other. That just doesn't happen. And it was almost I could see the words leaving my mouth. And as they were leaving my mouth, I wanted to kind of like get them back in again.
Yeah.
Like as I was saying it, I was like, oh God. And I went upstairs, and then I came back downstairs again and said, I'm really sorry. I shouldn't have spoken to you like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I want to say something about why we do this. We do this because several reasons. We do it so we don't drink or use again.
Yeah.
We do it because this stuff will fester inside of us. It will make our relationships between people icky.
Yep.
It will build, and we will just feel uncomfortable, and our brains will look for relief. But I want to tell you, here's the other thing I have done. So I did direct amends to the head of the drug addiction team in Cambridgeshire, and the head of 2 charities in Cambridgeshire in one day.
Yeah.
I left them on wings. I felt incredible. I was like, this is what freedom feels like.
Yeah.
And it was a really interesting process, because what happened, the gift of this is what you begin to see is that nothing is personal. That you have this kind of vision, this version of events, and someone else has a completely different version of events. And that a lot of this is just going on in your head. Oh, you're the worst person in the world, and all of this kind of stuff. And I just kind of left feeling free and light and incredible. And I'm going to tell you, that's kind of my motivation. Like, right. I know I just really like living in this place that I'm living, which is this really balanced, free, easy place that life for me back in the day was just very different. Every day was just very difficult. Everything, dealing with everything, right?
Sure.
We've talked about it all the time on the podcast. But so this feeling of freedom and ease and just going, it's just so incredible. I don't want to lose it, and I protect it. And I know through experience that if something's bothering me, if it's coming up and I'm, reflecting on, oh God, then I just got to send an email or a text or pick up the phone or see that person or just go. And often I've had the experience of making friends with people, and people going, what? I have no idea what these 3 women, they didn't know. And I said, I said, I just know I wasn't my best self. I wasn't my best self during that period of time. I really regret not showing up in ways that you deserved. And I'm just and they were like, oh, all right then. And I was like, it's that you were, and the freedom that comes from it, it's just undescribable. I'm so, over 20 years, I'll have a little argument. Oh, do I really need to? Or maybe I don't. Or, how can I swerve? Can I swerve this? How can I swerve it?
Yeah.
And then I would nearly always come to the same conclusion of you can't. Yeah. And I know once I do it, because it's all about pride, isn't it? It's pride. It's
Yeah.
pride that prevents us. It's the
Pride and cowardice sometimes in my case. There
yeah.
was I know this is not going to go well, and I don't want to face your anger. But I think kind of what we said earlier on with that force field of kind of difficulty is when you think of a person, if you were to bump into them, would you feel completely at ease, or would you have a niggling or quite large sense of discomfort about being around them because of the way you had behaved? And that should really be the kind of litmus test for whether or not these people belong on your list, and whether you should make the effort to go and address it. Because if there are people that you can think of, however close they might be to you, that you feel if I bump into them, I'm going to feel really uncomfortable. And uh, if that's the case, then they probably need you to try and find them. And as I said, I took this particular uh, process very seriously, to the point of putting adverts in papers, looking for people, and actually the ones that took the most effort to find were usually the people who were most angry and still retained a degree of anger. And I mean, I've had some really wonderful experiences as well. I mean, they've had, as you said, I've had plenty of those experiences where people kind of go, "Well, don't worry, that was when you were using, and don't. It's all gone now." And
And that just clears the air, doesn't it? And you're just like, I just don't need to worry when I see that person. I can just be like, oh hi,
yeah,
not
yeah,
like, oh,
exactly, yeah,
were they thinking
exactly,
about that time when I threw up in their living room or
yeah,
whatever?
yeah,
You just the clearing. You can't really minimize how significant it is to clear the air.
yeah. Especially because when you think back, how many times did you avoid people? Did you not go to places?
Oh,
Did you, as we said
yeah.
earlier on, walk around the block to avoid them? Even metaphorically speaking, do that. What effort does that take? And it always because we were ashamed, or usually because we were ashamed of our behavior, and we knew we'd
Mm,
done something inappropriate. I mean, there were things that kind of you do when certainly if you're using drugs like I did, there's a lot of amongst drug there's a lot of you know jiggery pokery going on, but I don't kind of that's part of the kind of process of being a professional addict, is
mm.
that you are going to kind of, give people bad deals and things. I'm not going to
It's
go,
not
I'm
a
not going to,
noble trade.
it's not a
It's not a
noble trade.
noble
No,
trade.
it's not. It's very far from a noble trade. Yeah. So I think there was also something too about making restitution. There was, it's all very well. I mean, words are good, but there were certain times. There was one time, um, a woman I loved very dearly and still would consider my feelings for her to be incredibly affectionate and loving. Uh, she, long story short, but she entrusted me to look after some expensive jewelry while she was in prison.
Jesus.
Yeah, exactly. And of course,
Sold it.
I sold it. Yeah, exactly, straight away. It took me quite a long time to find her, but when I went and met with her, she was really, really pleased that I had made the effort to actually kind of verbally apologize and own up to what I'd done, and but I also gave her I couldn't restore the jewelry. I gave her a very expensive watch, and it made a big difference to her because it kind of meant
Yeah.
it wasn't just words.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
actually giving you something
Yeah.
that I know it's not what I took from you, but it's a real I'm trying to balance the books here, uh, and I could see when I did it. Well, I hope I saw what I saw. It was that gesture made a big difference. It made it really cemented the fact that I really was upset about what I'd done, and that I really did want to. So I think there is a place sometimes for kind of balancing restitution of some kind in more than just a verbal sense. And I think, sometimes you may not be able to pay back, so you have to do it in a different way, or
Yeah.
find it. I've been given the opportunity with some people to uh, provide some therapy for one of their children or something,
Yeah.
okay, well, don't worry, we'll call, that'll go towards balancing the books. And I do feel now that I can't, as I said, my last person I discovered last year, and it went very badly from my point of view. She was still extremely hurt and still extremely upset, and it was very, very painful. I mean, it was painful for me, but it was very painful for her. And I'm still glad I did it. I'm
Yeah.
still glad I addressed it. I'm very sad about the outcome of it, and but it did show me that time isn't necessarily always a healer. That was a
Yeah.
big lesson that I learned from that one. Was that okay? Well, I could easily have gone. Well,
Yeah.
it's 36 years ago. No, it was more than
Yeah.
that. It was 40 years ago.
Yeah.
What harm? 40 years
Yeah.
ago. It wasn't. She hadn't forgotten it.
I don't know. I'm noticing something as I age. I'm really, really thinking about actually that there's something there you said. I'm thinking a lot about my 20s and my 30s, and because I've moved around a lot, like
Sure.
what I've been thinking about is how connected we all are. Like there's something about like, I don't know that when you age, there's just something about, maybe I'm never going to go back to that place or see those people, but I don't know, we carry this stuff. I think I lived a lot in my 20s, like, because I moved all the time. It's like,
Sure.
okay, cut, done, but it's not true. Someone I drank with years ago in my 20s got connected on Facebook, and she's read my book and is now sober. And it's like, I haven't seen her for, 25 years, and never thought I would again, and it's really lovely to be connected and be like, oh my God, what, really? You read my book and now you stopped drinking. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And like just chatting a little bit about the times. And it's like, I don't know, I feel like the past can always come back round again. I think that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Is nothing stays in the past. Nothing stays in the past. It all can come forward with us. And that's why we want to do our best at this, because it is, I want to kind of wrap it up here in that there are rewards for us, and in
Yes.
that the best thing for everybody is that we stay clean and sober, right? That
Yep.
is the best
Yep.
best thing, and we need to take responsibility for that. And that hopefully that's better for everyone as well, is that they have had that, whatever it is, inside of them is like, well, I needed that acknowledged.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
I needed
Yep.
someone to say that
Yep.
was upsetting, actually, or what
Yeah.
that was out of order or whatever.
Yeah.
So this is such a worthwhile exercise.
It is. And also, you can bring it down to a micro scale as well, in that if I've done something to upset my wife, I can
Yeah.
sort of muddle along and, forget it. If I actually go and say, look, I'm really sorry, that must have really, if I actually acknowledge it, and, suddenly the air is clear,
Yes.
but,
Yeah.
so you can, it doesn't have to be the macro big things that you did when you were, obvious things that you did harmfully when you were drinking, but it's also, you can do it on a very small scale. It's like, you make a mistake, you upset somebody, but if you go quickly and go, yeah, I'm sorry, I was out of order there, or whatever phrase you want to use, suddenly the situation is diffused, and the person appreciates you having listened to them and recognized that their feelings were upset. And, so I think the whole process of kind of making amends, making restitution, acknowledging our mistakes with the person that we have made the mistake with, I think it's a really, as you said, I think it's a really good thing to do. And there's a very good reason why it's a long held spiritual
Ancient
principle that goes back
tradition. Yeah.
thousands of years, is that,
Yeah.
I'm sure it
Human
wasn't
beings need this.
yeah, I'm sure it wasn't phrased that way, but
Yeah.
keeping your side of the street clean, that's the way to
Yeah.
live a life that is
Yeah.
not going to be plagued by anxiety and fear.
Yeah. Human beings need to do this. So
Yeah.
yeah, I hope hopefully you found this helpful and
Yeah.
useful. We are going to wrap it up there. Please subscribe and give us a rating on the podcast app, whatever app you listen to, so you don't miss an episode. And we'll be back soon. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you
Take
very
care.
much. Bye-bye.